Hello, welcome back to the woods, and welcome back to another bushcraft for beginners. And in this one we're going to be looking at shelters that we use in bushcraft. So that's right, this one follows on from our previous bushcraft for beginners videos. We have looked at the gear list that you're going to need, the clothing that you're going to wear while you're out, and we started to look at some of the skills that you're going to need. In our last video we looked at knots. We linked up with our previous projects video where we made a couple of items. We've put those together to actually produce a couple of items that are going to help us in this bit, our shelter section. How to set up shelters easily in the woods. But we'll start with a question: why do we need shelter? So shelter is there to protect us from the elements, be it the sun, or it could be the wind, the rain, the snow, or combinations of any of those. Our first line of defence, well, that's our clothing. That's why we choose our clothing carefully. And if you look back at the video, that's exactly what we did. We've got our warm layers, we've got our environmental layers, we've got our weatherproof layers. So our clothing is our first line of defence. But the shelters we're going to look at in this video, well, they centre around what happens when we stop. Because we may stop. We may stop because we want to sleep, or because we want to eat or drink, or we may stop because we want to craft something or carry out a skill or just carry out our admin. Our shelter gives us somewhere protected, somewhere safe where we can carry out any of those tasks. So what I'm going to look at is, well, common shelter types that we use in bushcraft, and we'll look at the pros and the cons for each. And we'll start with tents. Now the pros for tents, well, they're ideal if there's more than one of you, if there's a group of you, if you are a family and you're out. Also, if it's going to be more than one night. Normally we don't just put up a tent if we're going to be out one night. Also, they're very good in the winter because we can warm a tent. They also are ideal to protect us in places where, well, perhaps there's not a massive amount of vegetation, perhaps there aren't trees, so mountain and moorland areas, tents are absolutely ideal, and in those places the weather can whip up, it can be unpredictable, winds can change direction, so it gives us good all-round protection that's adaptable and that we can move. Also, if you're somewhere like Scotland or parts of Snowdonia, certain times of the year the insect life, the dreaded midges, can get to us if we're in an open shelter. In a tent, well, you're protected from that. So there are very good reasons for using a tent, although personally I don't normally associate a tent with bushcraft. The cons, well, they can be big and heavy. They take time to set up, which we may not have. And also, and it's the big one for me, I want to come out and do bushcraft and I want to spend time in nature, but as soon as I get in that tent and I zip it up, well, that's it, I might as well be at home, I might as well be in a building because I'm shutting nature out. So the next type of bushcraft shelter that I want to talk about is what I call the survival lily shelter. And I've got nothing against survival lily, but she seemed to spawn a whole lot of people who did something very similar, and they went and built these lean-to type shelters out in the woods, complete with a fire reflector and a raised sleeping platform and perhaps a wall round. I've even seen them with like a watchtower or something on them. They take tools to the woods and tarps and all of these things, and they construct this thing, this, well, I guess it's a bit like a shed in many ways in the woods. I don't like them. I think all they are is actually a stage for your Instagram perfect pictures. No. From a practical point of view, well, they're a fixed location. They're also easily damaged by members of the public. You can't be there all the time looking after them. And B, also they're not adaptable. The weather is a moving, flexible thing. It can change direction. If you've built your shelter and it's open on one side and that wind suddenly decides to change round, well, not a lot of cop. So those particular type of shelters I don't recommend and I don't like. So I'm going to leave that one just there. So our next type of bushcraft shelter I'm going to talk about is one, well, that I've spent a lot of time in over the years, and it's the debris hut. And I guess it's your classic archetypal bushcraft shelter. It's the one that everyone thinks of, that romantic notion of heading out into the woods with nothing but your hands, no tools, no materials, and creating a shelter from what you find. And it is quite an achievement, and it is also quite a big feature of most bushcraft courses. Their advantages, well, they weigh nothing. You don't have to carry anything into the woods with you because you're creating your shelter. They're fairly adaptable. When you arrive on site, you can position them where you want depending on the prevailing weather conditions. They dampen sound. They're a nice quiet space. They can insulate quite well when it's cold, and this is generally, well, quite a nice thing to do. Now the cons with them, because there are cons with them. Number one, and it's the one that most people underestimate, is the time factor. They're not something that you can come out and do in the woods and then do something else. So you don't just come out, set your shelter up and then get on with something else. That is the thing that's going to take the day, because to make a one person shelter, it takes one person a minimum of 4 hours. And then for every other person, we've got to add more time. You also need to think of the materials, because you've got to gather all those materials, and a lot of people underestimate how much material you're going to need to make a debris shelter. Not only the sticks, but the actual debris off the floor that you're going to pile up on the outside. And one of the big things that people don't talk about, yes, once we finish with them we should return them to nature, and I've taught lots of people to build them, and we've always afterwards spent a great deal of time returning everything to nature and making the site look like we haven't been there. But the problem is, what is not talked about is actually the ecological damage that you are actually doing. You are disturbing an environment, and it does over time change that environment, and not always for the better. There's a site that I've been going to for about 13 years, and we've had to change the way we work, because even though we moved the shelter building areas around to allow the time for it to regenerate, etc., it's changed that location. So you have to think about the ecological side of it as well. In bushcraft, well, we should be aiming to have no impact on the environment, as little as we possibly can. And it's that whole take only memories, leave only footprints mindset. But building debris shelters, well, you're not doing that, and there is a downside to it. So next up is natural shelters, features that you can use while you're out. It could be things like overhanging rocks, yew trees, large holly bushes, places where we can stop and seek shelter. I've spent many nights under a yew tree or under a holly bush, and they can be great places out of the weather. You feel sort of warm and protected in those places, but they have their downsides too. One, well, there's not actually that many of them and you're quite tired, because if the weather changes and you need shelter, well, it might be 2 or 3 miles away. You don't need that. You need something that you can be able to put up. The other thing is, well, they're not adaptable. The shelter side, certainly if it's something like a rock face, well, that only faces one direction. If the wind changes direction, what gave you shelter last time you used it may not give you shelter this time. So you need to think about that when you're out. A far easier option, well, is to carry your shelter with you, and we've discussed a couple of options. But the best option, for many reasons, I think, is the tarp or basher. So the tarp or basher. Basher, for our friends on the other side of the Atlantic, it's a tarp shelter. It's a military slang term which I think comes from our time in Southeast Asia or possibly India, somewhere like that. But it's just a quick shelter with a shelter sheet. That's all it is. Its advantages, well, it's lightweight. You don't need a whole lot of kit when you go out with one. It's also highly adaptable. It can be put up in lots of different configurations depending on the environment or the weather. This big one for me is, well, unlike a tent, once I'm inside it, well, I can still have a 360-degree view of the thing that I've come out to enjoy, i.e. nature. With the tent, remember I said, you zip it up and that's it, you shut it out, you might as well be indoors at home. In a basher, that's not the case. All you're doing is putting a covering above you, which is protecting you from the rain. Yes, we can configure it to protect us from the rain, but it's still an open shelter that gives you protection from the elements, but allows you to be part of nature. The last thing with it, the great thing with it is, well, there's no environmental impact. You're literally tying it between a couple of trees or spreading it over a rock, tying off a fence post, and when you take it down, there's no trace of it left behind. So from that point of view, it's a great item. There are lots and lots of different tarps out there. We've got AquaQuest ones, we've got the DD ones. I've got a 3x3 DD regular and a super light. I've got a 4x4 DD. There's loads and loads of different types out there. You can also go military surplus. You can buy British Army shelter sheets, and I've used quite a few over the years. They're very good. But what I'm going to use for this video, and it's the one that I included in the kit list, well, it's the poncho, the humble poncho. Not quite as big, and there are different ones out there. The reason I like ponchos is their versatility. I can use them, yes, to sleep under, I can use them to sit under and craft under, but also if I'm just stopping for a quick brew and I don't want to waste time putting stuff up and perhaps the weather is a bit iffy, well, I can just pull the poncho on over me, put my rucksack down on the floor, and that's it. I'm protected. It's a super simple little system. There are lots of different types. You've got the USGI version, you've got the Helicon Text version of the USGI version, you've got the very good one from One Wind, but the one I'm going to be using in this video is going to be my Dutch Army poncho. Now, as far as gear goes for this, obviously there's a couple of project items that we talked about last time, but the main item is going to be your Dutch Army poncho. On there, what I've also got is my tent pegs that we crafted in the last one. Also, that little toggle with a cord on it. You're going to find out a use for that in a bit. What I've also got is my jungle rope that we made in our knots project. Super useful item, and I'm going to show you again how we use that when we're setting up. Something else that's useful are these, and this is just a smaller version. It's got a toggle on the end and a little bag on the other end, but it's basically a small version of the jungle rope, and I carry a load of these, and these go on the corners of my basher. Some people tie them onto the loops and perhaps they put little pockets on the end. I don't. I have a toggle on the end so that I can move it around to different loops depending what setup I'm using, because I don't always use the same setup. Something else that's super useful for this setup is one of these, and all this is a bungee loop. It's got a big knot in the end to keep it in a loop. And then last but not least, my journey stick. And that, well, as I said before, it's got many uses, and it's great and very helpful when we're setting our shelters up. So there you go, that is the first part of our Bushcraft for Beginners Guide to Shelter. In the next one, as I said, well, we're going to be looking at how to set up a basher using, in this case, a waterproof poncho, which is from our kit list that we chose right back at the beginning. The techniques we're going to use, they're going to be applicable for whether you're using a tarp, a DD super light or a regular, whether you're using a USGI poncho or in this case one of the Dutch Army ones. But I'm going to show you how to set that all up, but that is in the next video. As I said, in this one there are lots of different shelter styles out there. What you want to get you started is something simple, something you can put up quickly. Once that shelter is up, well, then you can go off and you can experiment with the other types of shelter, whether it's one you're going to build yourself or use a natural shelter, but you're safe because you know that you've got a proper waterproof shelter set up in the background somewhere. So that's the idea behind it, having that somewhere safe where you can pitch yourself up and then go off and experiment, whether it's building a shelter, whether it's lighting a fire. The point is you've got something that's quick, that can get you out of the weather in a hurry. So if you enjoyed this video, then remember, hit that thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, then please like and subscribe to the channel. Down below in that description box, well, there's links to my social media. There's also links down there to my Etsy shop where you can get the Greencraft patch and a few other bits and pieces that I sell from time to time too. There is also in that description box a whole list of the kit that I use. So if you missed that first video which explained what the kit is, in the description box down below there is a link to most of it that you would need down there, and there is a link also down there to my Amazon affiliate page, so just follow the link over if you want to get yourself a smock or whatever. Anyway, I think that's everything. I've been Neil, and until next time, stay safe in the woods.